What is going on? There's a spider on the LCD of my camera. That's interesting. Huh. What's up, everybody? Dave
Derailed
Loughran.
by spider. Just end the stream.
Yeah, it just feels like a bad omen. I don't know. Anyway, I'm happy to be here. It is the NFL Strategy Show, as we like to call it, the Marathon Matchups Edition. Every single Thursday of the year, we'll be here with you. Dave Loughran on Twitter at Loughy_D. Hit me up. Joined by Matt Savoca at Draftaholic, game by game. And Matt, for the first time all season, we have not hit bye weeks yet, right? That starts next week. But for the first time all season, we only have 12 games instead of 13 games because we have a 9:30 Eastern time London game, just straight barn burner between the New York Jets and the Atlanta Falcons. So a little bit of a lesser workload today, but still a lot to get through.
Yeah, and man, those London games for the West Coasters, I feel bad for you out there. 6:30 a.m. start time. You got to be kidding me. But this main slate, we got a lot of good games and some good game theory here. We've had a lot of the top tier quarterbacks all on the main slate. Now we got to get into the nitty gritty, get into these low mid-tier salary plays that have some warts on their profile. Can't wait to dig into it.
Let's do it, man. And hey, happy to have you guys with us as always. Hit that thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. Where are we at? We're at 60,800 plus. You guys are the greatest. We love you for it. You already know that. So smash that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. And as you know, I say it all the time, we'll happily refund your misery. If you hate it and you wake up in cold sweats saying, I've made an awful mistake, just unsubscribe. But for now, subscribe. See how you like it. See if you fit in. I think you will. And join the channel if you'd like, because we've got the emojis, the custom badges. Looks like El Negro Loco. Is that the 6 month? Is that the, can't even tell. I got to be getting the 6 months soon on mine. I'm 10 days away. Sorry, Matt. I'm 8 days away from that beautiful 6 month badge. So we're getting there, man. We're going to have to get you one as well.
Yes, sir.
Let's do this. So we did change around the format a little bit today on Matt's recommendation. Really, it was a strong one that we will hit on the highest total games, really the most fantasy friendly games from the 1 p.m. slate first, go through them. And then once we hit the 4 p.m. wave of games, we'll hit on the highest total games there as well. And for those of you wondering, or somehow just have trouble seeing it, look to the left, the sidebar, all of the games are there. So if you're watching the show after the fact, or you jump in or midway through us being live, fast forward, rewind, whatever you need to do to hit on some of the games that you might be most interested in. And if you want to skip some, I would hope you don't. I hope you stick with us throughout the entirety of this. But if you want to, that's what it's there for your convenience. All right, Matt, let's do it. Green Bay and the Cincinnati Bengals. Green Bay coming into this one, just blowing the doors off Pittsburgh. I think we saw that coming. What we didn't see coming, even though I had a decent amount in Showdown, of course, you don't have much to choose from, was Randall Cobb coming through with a big game for the first time really being involved of the season since they brought him over from Houston, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling being on the IR. So let's kick it off with the Packers, only laying 3 points on the road. Pretty hefty total here and a Q tag on Aaron Jones, but I do think he's expected to play.
Yeah, I think he's going to play too. And yes, I know the Green Bay Packers have had kind of a wonky start to their season, all these narratives, especially in the preseason, but now they're 3-1 with a -5 point differential, which is something we don't see, but it's really something I expect to correct over these upcoming weeks here. And while it was really exciting to see the Cincinnati Bengals pull off a great victory, a really solid second half against the Jacksonville Jaguars, doesn't this feel like a game where they just get absolutely smoked at home by Aaron Rodgers? And so I was really surprised to see, just based on my gut feeling about what I know about these teams, that it was just 3 points at this point that the Packers were laying there. So I got to say, when I looked at Aaron Rodgers' projection, I thought, okay, that's pretty solid. But then I realized his salary was way up there this week, QB3 in DraftKings salary. And I think a lot of people are just not going to be able to go there. But then you look at the top stacks and their value ranking and their leverage ranking. And then you realize, well, because people aren't going to be able to go there, and there are some really solid spots elsewhere on this slate, the absolute lock of Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams might actually go under-owned compared to its ability to just destroy this slate. So that's where I'll start. And as you said, I think Aaron Jones is going to play. I think he just has a projection right in line with salary-based expectations. 5th on the slate in expected fantasy points, 5th on the slate in salary.
I don't know how you don't love these guys this week. I mean, if you wanted to run a skinny stack, that's fine. Whatever you want to do. But Davante Adams last week, that's an anomalous performance. All right. It's going to happen far less than it does. And still, right, he was targeted 11 times in a game that they won handily. It's not as if he wasn't involved at all. It's just Randall Cobb was the one that found the pair of touchdowns. That's all. 29 targets over the last 2 games for Davante Adams. Stop it. There's really no reason not to look at this as an absolute smash spot for him and Aaron Rodgers. What if you're just going full out stack here? Do you look at someone like Randall Cobb now that Valdez-Scantling is on the IR and say, you know what? They do have the 2 of these guys do have a legitimate rapport dating back years. And Randall Cobb was a player who in the past had been actively involved in the red zone, Matt. Somebody who in 2014 had 12 scores, 2015 and only 2015 had 6 touchdowns. I'm not saying he's your primary red zone target, obviously, but it isn't out of the realm of possibility to think that he could be valuable. The question, though, is on a 12-game slate, is there any need for this?
Yeah, certainly they all could be valuable, right? But as you alluded to, Davante Adams is just getting such a huge amount of the overall passing opportunity in this passing attack, as we would expect. His 20.2 expected fantasy points, remember, that just takes his opportunity, his volume, his air yards, his red zone targets, and it rolls it up into a statistic, into a scale that we can all understand on DraftKings scale. So 20.2 expected fantasy points, that absolutely blows everyone else out of the water. The highest expected fantasy points for any other receiver is 6.5 from Robert Tonyan, as we would expect. I actually don't hate Tonyan this week. His tight end 8 salary is kind of in the middle there, so people are probably going to be looking to pay even lower if they can. So especially if you do stack him with Rodgers, that's fine. I would like to see Randall Cobb's red zone usage increase. With Marcus Valdez-Scantling out, I really just don't know what the identity of the Packers is beyond Davante Adams. So I'm really just saving these players for mass multi-entry when I'm just cycling it with Aaron Rodgers as my quarterback.
Where are you at on Aaron Jones? His ownership's coming in very low right now, which makes him at least somewhat intriguing as a conversation piece. Like, I know that A.J. Dillon was worked in pretty significantly last game, 15 carries, again, in a game that they were they were handily winning that throughout. Is Aaron Jones tournament viable to you, or is this a price where you're like, all right, you know what? He's top 5 in salary. Maybe I just go to the passing game and lean on some of these other top tier running backs in the similar neighborhood of pricing.
No, he's definitely a tournament choice. And I'm not going to say this is a bad way to play DFS, but I do notice that one of the things that people do right when the salaries come out is they look at players in specific salary tiers and they say, okay, here's the top player in this tier of salary. Here's the bottom player in this tier of salary. But when I just go from a game by game standpoint to start my week, and I look at a player like Jones who has projections in line with salary-based expectation, but ownership not in line with salary-based expectation, what it tells me, what it signals to me, is that there are probably players that the field is weighting higher in a salary near Jones. So of course, I want to get leverage off those people who see a more surefire thing in another game with Jones here, who could easily be the engine of this offense in a game they're expected to win. And we both think kind of in our guts that the Packers could easily win by a touchdown or more.
Yeah, and I think also in our guts, we believe that while Cincinnati defensively has played above expectations coming into the season, they probably aren't, a brick wall, both on the ground or through the air. And we did see that last week where James Robinson, was he extraordinarily efficient on the ground? I mean, he wasn't insanely good, but he had some strong runs, still punched it in the end zone twice. And when you're talking about a guy in Aaron Jones, also when you have to worry about a Davante Adams and an Aaron Rodgers, there's no doubt Jones could have a big game. Plus, Matt, while he hasn't been actively involved in a big way in the passing game every week, there are games where Aaron Jones becomes a focal point of the offense in the passing game. And it's not out of the realm of possibility to say, well, outside of Devontae Adams, you have Robert Tonyan and Randall Cobb and Alan Lazard. Sure, let's get Aaron Jones work more into the passing game again this week. There's just a lot of different ways for him to pay off, and that's what I love about him.
Yeah, well said. I mean, we saw it in that game against San Francisco where the San Francisco defense was solely focused on taking away Devontae Adams and the deep pass. And so Aaron Rodgers just continually dumped it down. And we saw Aaron Jones have a career day. So, of course, not out of the question.
Where are you at on the other side with Cincinnati? Looking like, by the way, Joe Mixon, as it stands right now, I don't know his practice participation today. I haven't seen anything on that yet. We'll pay attention to that. Of course, this is 11 Eastern. We start this show in the morning. So there's not a whole lot to go off of. T. Higgins got in a limited practice, but all in all, there are some question marks in this offense right now.
Yeah, there certainly are. And from an advanced metric standpoint, they're not really sticking out. They rank 21st in EPA per play on offense. That's expected points added. That just compares this offense's ability compared to all other offenses we've seen since 2009. I would like to see Cincinnati really show up offensively here. I'd like to see them hang with Aaron Rodgers in the Green Bay offense. I'm just not so sure about it. We certainly have seen Joe Burrow play at a more efficient rate than he did last year. Right now, he ranks 6th in the NFL in adjusted yards per attempt, which is a really different player than we saw last year, who was highly inefficient, but was getting there on his volume. In our advanced stats, it does look like they are much more rush heavy this year than they were last year. Right now, they rank top 3 as the top 3 most rush heavy team in our game script adjusted rush rate. And their pace of play is actually super slow. They're right now ranked dead last in the league in adjusted pace of play. That's slowest pace of play. So I don't know if we're going to see as efficient of a game from Burrow as we saw against the Jacksonville defense. But here's what we do have to say. The Green Bay offense, when it's running on all cylinders, will force opposing offenses to play faster and to pass more than they would necessarily like to do. So we could see a more 2020-esque Cincinnati Bengals passing game, especially if T. Higgins is back in the lineup.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to say they face Jacksonville, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Minnesota. Not exactly a murderer's row of offenses that force teams to push the pace. But yes, exactly. In a game like this, and there's another game, a specific player that we'll get to that I talked about on yesterday's show with Eric Lindquist and Matt Gajewski, where I think once you add some context into some of these stats, begins to look a little bit different based on the teams they faced. But I don't know. I think, ultimately when you have Joe Burrow, who is really, he's attempting like 26 passes per game or something like that. It's 32, 18, 30, and 27. That is remarkably low given last year is averaging over 40 attempts per game. Granted, Mixon missed a bunch of games too, but if T. Higgins returns, do we turn to Jamar Chase and say, you know what, maybe this is a spot where you have to get to him, or you have to really target some of these tight receivers for Cincinnati, just given that we expect them to push the pace and we don't see really many avenues where Green Bay isn't able to put points up on the board.
Yeah, that's the biggest part right there. And so when you're talking about Green Bay really popping in the top stacks tool, especially in terms of tournament leverage, then I'm going to have run backs here with the Cincinnati passing game. And we have 3 solid options here. And don't forget about CJ Uzomah, the star of Thursday Night Football. Not to say that's going to happen every week here, especially with Higgins expected to slot back in. But Jamar Chase, what can you say about him? He's only 33rd amongst wide receivers in expected fantasy points, but his 6.5 fantasy points over expected per game right now ranks 1st in the NFL. So yeah, you could say, oh, that's a regression candidate waiting to happen. I'm here saying that for a rookie wide receiver to make that big of an impact, to be that efficient with Burrow at the helm, I'm thrilled for their future here. This could easily be a player who we're looking at 7K by the end of the season, who you're saying, oh man, I wish I got him and played him at 5,800 on DraftKings this week. So seeing projections right in line with salary-based expectation, that's still my favorite. But Tyler Boyd, all he does is score fantasy points. He too, 1.9, fantasy points over expected per game. That's top 25 in the league, while having a top 30 expected fantasy points rates. These guys can play. I'm happy to go here in tournaments, especially when I'm stacking Green Bay. And I don't mind using Burrow if I'm doing like a Green Bay heavy stack and I want to play Adams. I don't mind using Burrow as a salary saving option, saying, I think this game blows up. In that case, I might play 2 pass catchers from the Cincinnati side, saying they do keep pace in a pass heavy, offense heavy game.
Detroit and Minnesota. This one to me is pretty fun for a number of reasons. First off, I don't know if people are souring on Hawkinson after 2 underwhelming games, or Swift for not getting as much work in the run game as Jamal Williams did last week. But at the same time, Swift still has seen 50% of all of the running back carries on the season. Matt, both of the goal line carries went to Swift last week, despite Jamal Williams getting the majority of the carries in between the 20s. And again, 2 goal line carries to Swift. I'm still okay with that. And he ran 32 routes to Jamal Williams 5, was on the field for 73% of snaps to Jamal Williams 30. Point is, and we can get into ownership and contextualize this a little bit more, but I still think DeAndre Swift, who has that Q tag, but he's going to play, he's had the questionable tag for like 3 straight weeks, still has legitimate blow up potential in this game. Just given how valuable he is in both phases of the offense. Granted, he hasn't had any insane rushing totals yet, but he has 2 games with double-digit rushing yards, but he has 2 games with double-digit rushing totals, and he's been targeted a lot on the season. Against Minnesota, with them likely falling behind, I still have interest there. I still have interest in TJ Hawkinson. I know this isn't a great team, but the offense has at least proven that they're not so bad like last year's Jets to where we can't play them if they're playing or trailing from behind.
Yeah, that's right. And their offense goes as the opposing offense tends to go. So right. If the Minnesota Vikings can get out of this little slump that they find themselves in offensively, then I do think the Detroit Lions will be able to score with them. And that's why you see an implied total for them up over 21 points. So, of course, I'm going to get the players who are most utilized in that offense. And I'm not scared of some down weeks from TJ Hawkinson. I still believe in him, both short-term and long-term. And as you said, DeAndre Swift is getting so much opportunity, even on this bad offense, and especially through the receiving game, that it's unignorable. But the real kicker here is that the rest of the field is really starting to catch up here. I'm not going to deny that he, just from a volume standpoint, he's a value play. If you look at his expected fantasy points, 19.5 fantasy points, he needs 18.3 to be a 3x value at 6,100 on DraftKings. So just talking about opportunity base matching his a really good value play, it's hard to get away from him. But in tournaments, when the rest of the field is definitely expected to go there, now you're talking about a slightly different story. I want to play this maybe a little bit differently. His 11.4% projected ownership is 8th on the slate. I guess that isn't massive ownership, but you're certainly not alone, and you're certainly going to need to differentiate yourself in other ways.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not massive ownership, but when you look at, like, if you're doing it as if you're saying like he's 8th highest on the slate, are you talking about at his position, Matt, or just in general?
I'm saying at his position.
Okay, yeah. Who, Swift?
I believe so, yes. Got to run back to my metrics now. It could be overall.
I think, yeah, now he's 6th highest at the position since our last update, but this will change for sure. What I was going to say, though, is ownership is really flat this week because it's just really flat. Outside of Derrick Henry and a few guys at the top, you just have this huge range of like 12 to 9% players, where there's so many of them. I don't know how much of a difference, especially when you're looking at projections. This isn't actual ownership. It's a projection of what it should be. There's a margin of error always. I'd say like 12 to 9% isn't all that crazy, but I don't disagree that if Swift comes in very heavily owned, that's a spot that I'd be more than willing to pivot off of a little bit. R says in chat, Hawkinson is a better option than Swift. Vikings can stop the run. Yeah, they can. But again, like, Swift has 20% of the red zone targets this year. Not just, I mean, I care about what is the likelihood that he gets into the end zone. And he's been insanely involved inside that 20-yard line. So it's not like you're just playing him for the rushing downs. DeAndre Swift has insane passing game upside, especially if you're trailing. What do you make of Hawkinson and the rest of these kind of tertiary options in Detroit that have oddly enough been showing up from week to week? You just don't know who it's going to be.
Yeah, Hawkinson really intrigues me now that the field is kind of soured on him. Right now, seeing a projected ownership under 4%, at least from my run. I did this about an hour before showtime here. And when I see a salary-based expectation right in line with his projection, I'm pretty sold on this player. His expected fantasy points, again, look really, really solid. And he's been efficient in a rather inefficient offense. Nearly a half a point over expectation per game. So I'm fine going here. In large field tournaments, you got to say that the Minnesota offense is hitting. So I'm most likely to be playing these other receiving players like Khalif Raymond, who hit last week, or Quintus Cephas. I'm on Ross St. Brown only if I'm playing a premium player on the other side of this game, like Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson or Dalvin Cook, if we find out that he's going to be 100% going into this week. But otherwise, it's Hawkinson, it's Swift, and then it's large field tournament only.
Okay. And yeah, McNasty, I wouldn't say the Vikings are particularly stout at stopping the run either. They're allowing almost 5 yards per attempt. So, man,
they're pretty average all over the board defensively, to be honest.
That's the way I see it as well. Detroit is not average across the board when it comes to defense, Matt. I mean, this secondary is putrid. And if you're looking at PFF's coverage grade, they're just so far behind the next closest team that it's like one and then ... two, which is amazingly the Pittsburgh Steelers, who rank 31st. So I should say 32nd Lions, 31st in pass coverage is the Steelers. You go over to Football Outsiders, you're going to be seeing the exact same numbers. The Detroit Lions are awful, man. And I think when you look at guys like Jefferson and Thielen, the touchdown equity here is huge. The only question I have for you, and I do think it's a big one, is, and I mentioned this yesterday, how much should we be worried about the fact that, or the possibility that Kirk Cousins is just hyper efficient, right? And these guys score, but the yardage isn't necessarily there, and they just move the ball so easily with Dalvin Cook and Jefferson and Thielen. To me, it factors in. But I also think that there could be a 2-touchdown game in store for one of these wide receivers, and I'd like to get some pieces of it.
Yeah, that's well said. It's exactly how I feel. I think efficiency from the quarterback is not a thing we run away from for our receivers, right, for our skill position players, for our game environments. So if you're telling me that he has a low probability of hitting that 300 yardage bonus, okay, fine. I knock him down in my quarterback rankings. He's not going to be someone I prioritize. But the skill position players that we know that week in and week out, when this team does perform offensively, that they're going to be heavily utilized and probably the focal point of that scoring, I don't care if the quarterback is efficient in getting them there. I do think that Dalvin Cook is almost underrated for his abilities right now, based on being on two injuries at this point. We don't know if they were the exact same thing or just a re-aggravation, but he's still top 10 in yards from scrimmage per game. This is a player who I really am fine getting to, but I was surprised to see that his projection was a lot worse than his salary-based expectation. And I get it, 8,400, running back 4 on the slate. That's pretty high up there, but I still think in this game where they're expected to win by a large amount, Dalvin Cook is just really sticking out for me. But as you said, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, I'm absolutely fine getting there. They're both top 16 in expected fantasy points among all wide receivers. Jefferson, of course, a little bit higher. They need some pretty big games if they're going to be considered a value play. You need about 23 points from Jefferson at 7,700 on DraftKings. I think he can get there. Projection right in line with salary-based expectations. I think this Detroit secondary is bad enough to give up a huge game like that. So I want a piece.
Listen, I want plenty of pieces of this. Minnesota's been kind of hit or miss this year, and Dalvin Cook's been clearly banged up a little bit, but here's what we can agree on. Minnesota's going to score points. They're going to score points. Do we know exactly where they're going to come from? No. And is it as concentrated as last year? I don't know. I mean, are you worried that much about KJ Osborne and Tyler Conklin? I personally am not. even though they've been getting a decent amount of work. But ultimately, the Detroit Lions defense, or this Detroit Lions team, allowed 24 to a bad Chicago team, a bad Chicago offense. 19 to Baltimore. We go back to the fact that should have been 30 something if Marquise Brown was semi-competent. 35 to Green Bay, 41 to San Francisco. They're going to get tuned up by a pretty decent Vikings offense, and I am absolutely here for it. So,
well, you know what? I wrote in my notes, they better, because right now they have a +2 point differential, and fine. I would say that if their defense was as bad as it has been, say, a year ago at this time, but everyone's saying this is an unlucky team. They're 1-3 with a positive point differential, but this team has way too much talent to be 17th in expected points added per play on offense and just 17th on defense. They look like a middling team in advanced metrics with star power, so they better bring it offensively.
Yeah, you're damn right. Chris Ostro says, yeah, OBJ, LOL. Yeah, dude, that was tilting, man.
Tilting.
And Baker Mayfield missed him on what would have been an easy touchdown. And, you can't just use that as an excuse all the time. I talk about Marquise Brown, even though that is a legitimate excuse. He dropped 3 touchdowns. But with OBJ, God, that
he was running free. It would have been in a slate breaker. Ugh.
Yeah. How many times have we said it, Matt? The difference between one play being converted or not is sometimes the difference between your entire week or a player's entire week,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, specifically for OBJ, it didn't hit. You can make fun of us all you want. But the other thing long-term is that shoulder injury we just got word about from Baker Mayfield. That ain't good.
No. And it's no surprise that he can't throw the deep ball right now. So
exactly.
That sucks. Would have been helpful information yesterday. What movie is that from? I'm paraphrasing. It's not perfect, but you ever see You ever see The Wedding Singer?
Oh yeah.
Remember, she doesn't show up. He's sitting at his stoop and he's like, yesterday. Great flick. Anything else on Minnesota and Detroit? Or do you want to keep this going?
KJ Osborne looks like he was a flash in the pan. Hey, well, we might see it again, but he's outside the top 50 in expected fantasy points. Him and Conklin, pretty meh to me. Just get to the big guys if you can get to this game.
All right, let's talk about Tennessee and Jacksonville. 49-point total here. Dude, that Tennessee team, you got to be kidding me. I know you're dealing with injuries, but did we not go into the season thinking this could be a decent football team? Because I certainly did. And what are they? Are they 1-3 now?
Right now, they are 2-2. But they play in the AFC South, and they are in first place.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The win over Seattle was impressive. The win over Indy was a win that should have been a win. And that loss to the Jets, though, again, there's a lot of parity in football, and I understand that anything can happen from week to week, but shit, dude, you got to take care of business against the New York Jets, and they couldn't. Now you've got them going into Jacksonville against a team that may have had some distractions, should I say, over the last week, Matt?
Well, whatever could you mean? Nothing should be grinding on them.
No, exactly. Urban Meyer finger banging some random chick in a bar.
It wasn't the best look, and I honestly, look, I don't make the rules, as you say always. You are not the moral arbiter here, but I thought that was it for Urban Meyer.
I've got to be honest with you, though, right? If you're a player, how many of these players behind the scenes are like, yo, Urban's doing his thing, man? I'm just saying.
I don't know.
I'm
Man
sure
has a wife, Dave.
What's that?
Man has a wife.
Oh, I'm not condoning it. It's a total scumbag move. And to be fair, a pretty stupid one as well. People know who you are in Ohio. Again, I would never do that. I don't suggest anyone does that in case anyone takes my advice on this show. But if you're going to do it, right, Matt, if you've decided and made up your mind that this is the direction you want to take, maybe don't do it in a crowded bar where everyone has phones in their pockets.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
I don't know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Maybe in the 90s.
What a weekend.
maybe in the 90s where like the closest you'd get is a Polaroid, but now all you do is just take your phone. I don't know. I just very stupid, but here we are. And what I was going to actually what I was leading to is, I think you'd agree with me because you and I think did that show for Live Before or Deeper Dive. Jacksonville really doesn't look that bad or didn't look that bad offensively. Laviska Shenault was targeted downfield multiple times. Do you know he had as many air yards essentially in week 4 as he did in weeks 1 through 3 combined? Like, those are encouraging things. It sucks that DJ Shark went down in the first play, especially because I loaded up on over props. And of course I had him in a ton of DFS contests, but their offense looked better. They ran the ball efficiently. James Robinson looked good. Shenault was actually appropriately used for the first time. And Trevor Lawrence made some fucking good passes.
Yeah, I mean, it was great to see them come alive as an offense and just actually look like a competent NFL offense. But I still don't know if they're outside of the bottom 5. They've actually like escaped the cellar in terms of offensive ability. One thing we do have to say is that James Robinson's projection compared to salary-based expectation, I mean, he looks like one of the absolute best value plays on this slate. The only problem is you're not going to be alone. It looks like he's going to be second among running backs in ownership, maybe even higher by the time we get to Sunday. And yeah, I think that, you know, it's really terrible for DJ Chark in a contract year where it looked like he was going to be a major focal point of this offense for him to go down. But we do probably know where a majority of this opportunity is going. And last week, it was clearly a Laviska Shenault game where Marvin Jones was the focal point for the defense on Cincinnati, and he was kind of blanketed, only got 3 targets, I believe. So Shenault took over as the primary receiver, and unsurprisingly, Tavon Austin had a whole lot of snaps and not very little, or very, very little usage at all. So I'm probably not going there even in large field tournaments. Although I do have to say his projection inside the top 50 is way, way better than a typical 3K receiver. He will be on the field. I just really think that Marvin Jones is going to have a bounce back game here. I think he's top 20. Yes, top 20 in expected fantasy points per game. And even in this inefficient offense, he's been right in line with his expectation in terms of fantasy points above or below expected. So obviously James Robinson here just from a volume standpoint. And then my favorite is Marvin Jones.
So what do you make of this Tennessee defense through the first 4 weeks? I mean, are we looking at a football team that is just pedestrian? Like, I mean, they seem very average on all fronts, Matt. 8.4 yards per attempt. They've allowed 8 touchdowns through the air. They grade out essentially as a middle of the road defense on almost all fronts. Like, I'm not scared of this Tennessee defense at all right now. And I could see Shenault having himself a game too. Look, I'm not suggesting to stack this team. I'm not there yet. Okay. I'm not there quite yet, especially because I think that James Robinson is going to be used more frequently.
But I mean, even the Jets got there. The Jets got there last week.
Oh God, I don't do this to me, man. You're right. Like you're 100% right. But it is so like what you could see yourself with some Lawrence Jones Shenault stacks. I guess it's not crazy.
Yeah, because then you can run it back. I don't care if I run it back with Derrick Henry. Mm-hmm. If AJ Brown plays this week, I think he's a major regression candidate, especially if Julio sits. And, you know, one thing to your point about how our preseason expectations are not lining up with what we're seeing on the field for Tennessee, we said they were a good team. We certainly never said they were a deep team. And so now the injury bug hits them a little bit. They are banged up on the offensive line as well. This could derail quickly in Tennessee. I'm not saying it's going to, especially with the division they play in. But you know what? There's a possibility here where it's just like a running game fest. And James Robinson and Derrick Henry just take the reins of this game and get all the opportunity. But I'm not saying it's out of the realm of possibilities either that Trevor Lawrence actually is forced to pass and 2 players from this offense hit. And we would know where those 2 players would most likely be. So it's not crazy.
Totally fair. And I'll say this much. This was something I talked about before the season. The Titans have made for an amazing fantasy matchup. Now, mind you, last year they were average defensively as well. But they had such an efficient offense with Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown, and Tannehill was really good. And the line held up enough to where he wasn't getting murdered every game. But they still had 13 of 16 games go over 50 total points. They had 7 go over 60, and they had 3 go over 70. So there were some real big time shootouts in Tennessee Titans games. This actually could, Matt, you're right. This could be a really good stat candidate as a game. Even if you were to go, would you go Tannehill on the other side though, with, an AJ Brown? Would you have AJ Brown and Derrick Henry lineups without Ryan Tannehill? Like how far are you willing to go with this game?
Ooh, yeah, I think A.J. Brown actually could get there on an efficiency day, so you don't need to have Ryan Tannehill in your lineup. And we've talked about this on previous versions of this show, where Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry have had big ceiling games together. So those two things aren't out of the question here. The one thing I will say is that Derrick Henry's expected ownership really comes into play in the fact that just moving away from Derrick Henry and playing this game heavily in a different way, expecting Derrick Henry not to get there, is going to differentiate you somewhat. But, who's to say here? I mean, Derrick Henry easily could be that player who scores 50 points here. But I just think that going with the passing game, especially if Brown is back, I think we really know where that's going too. So I'm depending on the type of tournament I'm playing is really how I'm thinking about this game differently.
Okay. It's kind of an exciting game though when you look at it from that angle. When you zoom out and consider how bad Tennessee's defense has been, now you just need their offense to be somewhat functional. That's the problem. It hasn't been in large part, but in this matchup they should be. I like both sides of it, no doubt. What's wrong with my mic, Jordan? What?
Yeah, I hear it going in and out. Yeah.
It definitely shouldn't be happening. But anyway, I'll fix it when we go to Miami and Tampa Bay. Matt, you've got the Tampa Bay Bucks, 10-point home favorites, 47.5-point total. They're expected to score a lot of points here. But if we started off with Miami, how much interest do you have in a Miami team that's starting Jacoby Brissett? Brian Flores just decided, hey, I'm not going to use Myles Gaskin at all last week, which was crazy because he had out-touched Malcolm Brown 43-17 in the backfield over the first 3 weeks. And then you've got Will Fuller, once again, unsurprisingly, on the IR with a broken finger, which leaves us with low ADOT Jalen Waddle, Devontae Parker, and Mike Gesicki, who's getting some decent red zone work. Can we look at this game and say, well, Tampa Bay has struggled to defend the pass, and maybe this is one of those weeks where it's ugly, but even if you don't want to stack Miami, there could be some really good run back options in a Tampa Bay stack and run back with a pass catcher from Miami, because I like the sound of that.
Yeah, I can't believe we're in agreement here, but yeah, I think this is a great place to go. This passing game on the Miami side, if you assume that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers get back to their typical high-scoring ways that we didn't see in a rainy Sunday night game back in New England last weekend. So, yeah, Jacoby Brissett has actually been surprisingly aggressive, and he's been inefficient, but not so much more inefficient than Tua Tagovailoa was in this same offense. So he's 18th among all quarterbacks in expected fantasy points per game. I guess that puts him in the bottom tier, but that doesn't make him unplayable, especially when you consider that there are 22 quarterbacks who have salaries higher than him this week. And so if you do say, okay, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense is going to score, forcing the Miami offense to try and score with them, and the Buccaneers defense has been one of the worst defense from a schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed aspect. They're actually second worst in the NFL. That's more advantageous for defenses. And they're a huge pass funnel, meaning that it's much easier to pass on them than rush on them.
It's not easier. It's literally the only route you can take against Tampa Bay at this stage of the game.
Yeah, their D-line is not the problem, as we'll say. And there's a reason they're bringing in Richard Sherman off the street. And not to say that I hope it succeeds, but like that's the level of that's the dire situation that they are in right now in the secondary. And so I'm happy to see Devontae Parker getting utilized more often downfield. Mike Gesicki is essentially being used as a wide receiver. He's not being used in line at all. So I think that, now that Will Fuller is out for an extended period of time, we have 3 players on this offense that is going to be forced to pass against a bad defense. So you can absolutely go here and then run it back with one of the premium bucks on the other side.
I'm with you. League high 11 touchdowns allowed through the air by the Bucs this year. And it's not even like their secondary is as bad as Detroit. It's just, like you said, everything sets up wonderfully for opposing passers, even if they're not absurdly efficient, although they are allowing a 73.7% completion percentage. They're going to have to throw no matter what. No matter what, they're going to have to throw. And Matt, not to get into just like super basic stats, but the Tampa Bay Bucks are allowing 328 passing yards per game. That's a lot of yards.
Yeah, and they played, teams like the Falcons, who have not really shown up in other games before the Patriots game. And, we'll get there with Mac Jones. Right now, that offense does not look all that exciting. The lowest points they had given up in a game was 25.
Crazy. Yeah. All right. On the Bucs side, there's not a whole lot to say here outside of there's going to be some points scored. They've got a insanely high total this week. I believe on this slate, it is the highest. Let me just double check here. Oh no, the Dallas Cowboys are 29.5. Bucs are at 29, tied with the Vikings. Okay. Fair enough. Fact remains, they're going to score a lot of points. And I think the question really is, where do we go? Do we go to Godwin? Do we go to Antonio Brown, who was out with COVID and then return with 11 targets, Matt? This is the thing that sucks about this offense, and we know this, is that it's not concentrated. Brady throws to whoever's going to move the ball downfield and get in the end zone. The good thing about it is it's not concentrated, and that means that none of these guys on any given week are going to get a ton of ownership. Rob Gronkowski also not playing. So what do we do with this team? What do you think of Xavier Howard on the other side? And who are your favorite options in the passing game?
Yeah, the Miami secondary is no joke. Let's just start there. In PFF's coverage grade, they're right now 4th in the NFL, and it's really razor close. They're almost, they're really neck and neck for 3rd there. But I still think with this offense having 3 primary targets, we don't have to be super concerned about shadow coverage on any one of those players. And as you said, it does sort of lower the ownership on all of them, but it doesn't lower the expected opportunity, especially on a scale like expected fantasy points. These receivers all grade out really strongly compared to the rest of their position because of the efficiency and the volume of Tom Brady's offense. So Mike Evans, I think he's a huge regression candidate here positively, where he's 5th amongst all wide receivers in expected fantasy points per game right now, but he's at -3 fantasy points under expectation. I don't think he somehow forgot to play. I just think that teams are prioritizing defending him, which is leaving players like Chris Godwin, who does have a better projection compared to his wide receiver, a little more open. But I still think Evans is a clear candidate, seeing 7.3% projected ownership, one of my favorite term and plays here. And I certainly don't mind going to Godwin, going to Brown, who has a salary actually outside the top 30 wide receivers. I mean, that's a buy for me. Expected fantasy points, even as the wide receiver 3 on this team, he ranks 24th among all wide receivers on this slate in expected fantasy points. This is why we target high volume, high implied total offenses. So I love it. And even Cameron Brate, 3,300 on DraftKings, you could do worse.
Leonard Fournette's averaging over 25 routes run per game. He's clearly taking over as the lead back, despite the Ronald Jones touchdown screw that guy. You're dead to me, as from a football's perspective, of course. Where do you go with the backfield? And do you think Leonard Fournette is worthy of this ownership that he's garnering right now? 4th highest on our ownership tool, our projected ownership, 3rd highest running back, 4th highest player overall. Woof.
Yeah. So that is one of the things I love to do in my process is when I turn the week over, one of the first things I do before I dig into the spreadsheets, into the numbers, I just look at the slate and I just kind of think in my head how I believe the game is going to go. And when I saw this Miami Tampa Bay matchup and I thought about how tantalizing it was from the past standpoint, I went in the back of my mind, oh, this is the week that Fournette breaks one. This is where he destroys the slate with 2 big runs or something like that. But yeah, it's a great play. And I'm a little annoyed that the rest of the field is seeing it that way. They could easily be in garbage time by the end of the third quarter here with Fournette taking a huge amount of the workload. I don't think that I'm probably going to be with the field or below just because I think the passing game is where these points come from in this Tampa Bay offense. But I completely get it. 5,200, that's so hard to ignore.
Matt, one thing, excuse me, I did want to mention before we move on to the next game, because I do think it's important, is the one biggest concern I have here with Miami is this offensive line is legitimately bad, right? Like they're really not good at all. And that is something that could lead to some real trouble because like we've said, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will get to the quarterback. They will find ways to get to the quarterback. And I know I think they only have 7 sacks this year, which is pretty surprising, but this is still a pass rush in a line that could create some problems against the Miami team that has really been completely incapable of protecting their own quarterback. So I throw that in there just to ask, how much do you think this could benefit potentially a Jalen Waddle in the event that Brissett needs to get the ball out early? You're going to need to rely on yards after the catch, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to think that Waddle might be busy because of this matchup.
No, not at all. Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki, and that's why I'm not surprised to see both of these players' projections ahead of their salary-based expectations, especially with a player like Waddle who only needs about 14.5, 15 points to be considered a 3X or higher value on the slate. I think it's very possible we just see enough dump-offs, 7 or 8, where he just needs to be remotely efficient to get to that point. So I'm there with you. Tight end, I think you could do way, way worse than Mike Gesicki in this expected pass-heavy game. I mean, the Tampa Bay defense and secondary, I don't think they're going to prioritize stopping him. So I think he could be a big check-down option as well if they need it.
All right. What are we up at next? Let's go Philly and Carolina. Jordan, also, if you want to throw that Prize Picks thing into the sidebar, we forgot to. Well, it was in. I forgot to do it earlier.
Well, it's a solid transition, actually. Sorry to cut you off there because Waddle is actually in my Prize Pick selection for the week. I'm going to take the over on his receiving yards. It's just at 50.5. I think that is very modest, and so I'm going to take the over there.
He only needs like 20 targets to get there.
Right.
I'm kidding. We joke because he had that. What was the one game? Like 12 receptions for 30 yards or something. It's crazy.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
I'm with you on that. That's actually a pretty interesting one. I mean, when you think about it, you're talking about a Tampa Bay team that will force you undoubtedly to throw the football. You cannot run against them. And if you think that Malcolm Brown and maybe the ghost of Myles Gaskin returns, if you think those guys are going to be able to do anything whatsoever on the ground, I'd say you have another thing coming. But Prize Picks is pretty awesome. And I know a lot of you guys who have tried it out enjoy it a lot, especially because if you use the promo code Awesemo, you get up to $100 instant match deposit bonus when you sign up and deposit for the first time using, again, the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO. But if you're wondering what it is, it's a place where you don't have to worry about sharks or optimizers or MME or anything like that. It's daily prop-based contests, okay? All you do is pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players available on the board to go over or under their projected scores. You're essentially putting them in a lineup. Could be 2, 3, 5 players, whatever. It's really like a parlay, except in this sense, you don't have to worry about the odds. So, you're not paying extra for an over. There's not heavy juice on any of these, which I don't know how many times Matt and I have talked about it. You always pay attention to the touchdown props because they don't juice those touchdown props whatsoever. Got to be careful with some of these, but when you compare them to other books, you're going to find legitimate value out there. And you can do baseball, basketball, NFL, any of these sports, esports even. And if you know more than one sport and you're confident, you can make this lineup with 5 different props, 5 different over-unders, and it can be for multiple sports. So check it out. It looks great. Go to prizepicks.com, check it out, or check it out in the App Store or the Google Play Store. It looks so nice. It's very easy. It's smooth. It's simple to understand and to start making money. And of course, you get up to $100 when you use the promo code Awesemo when you sign up and deposit for the first time. So Matt, you're going Waddle over 55.5 receiving yards?
I am. I think he gets there on his 98 targets.
Yeah, I'm looking at this. This sounds so nuts to even say this out loud, but I was looking at Zach Wilson over 240 passing yards. It sounds insane, but against Atlanta, I really don't think it is. He's done that twice easily in 4 games this season, despite being wildly inefficient in most of these. Atlanta's secondary is atrocious at this point, and I think Zach Wilson can get over that, especially given that their run game is far from potent. So give me over 240.5 on Zach Wilson. I think we get there. All right, what game were we going to here? Was it
Philly, Carolina, I believe.
Carolina, Philadelphia. Thank you. We switched the run sheet up a little bit. So Philadelphia and Carolina. Eagles, Jalen Hurts. The guy's just been automatic from a fantasy standpoint, no matter how bad he's been on the field. He's actually been pretty decent in most of in at least half of these games. Have you ever seen 2 receivers, Matt, within the first 4 weeks of the season, run out of bounds, come back in, score beautiful touchdowns, 30-plus yards downfield, and they get called back because they went out of bounds without being touched? Rager has done that, and Devontae Smith in weeks 2 and 4. It blows my mind.
Yeah, the Eagles have had a lot of unforced errors, multiple touchdowns last week, called back by penalties. And, what can you say? This is a matchup of the greatest running quarterback on the slate and Jalen Hurts. And but to say that Sam Darnold hasn't been anything but great as a rusher this year is incorrect. Those rushing touchdowns matter more than anything else. But this Philadelphia offense, I'm incredibly impressed, at least from a fantasy perspective, with what Jalen Hurts brings to the table. I'll go back to the well every single week, even though now his salary is creeping up. 4th on the slate amongst all quarterbacks at 7,000 on DraftKings. And you know what? Because that salary has started to creep up, we're now seeing an expected ownership start to go down. And I know some of that is the respect to Carolina's defense, but I don't think we should be saying that we should change Hurts' projection significantly because of the quality of the Panthers defense just yet. We're talking about a player because of his rushing upside and his ability to pass in really whatever game script. He's second among all quarterbacks in expected fantasy points, and he's playing above expectation this season. So Jalen Hurts is still one of my absolute favorite quarterbacks, unparalleled upside, although there is another quarterback who we'll talk about later who certainly could have that same kind of upside here. I'm fine going to this Philly offense. I think they could show up more than their implied total suggests that they will. And I still think Devonta Smith is a buy candidate, despite having a projection that is not as good as his salary-based expectation. He just strikes me as a player that we're going to wish we got him at 5,900 by the end of the season. And so if the Philadelphia Eagles are able to pass and able to stay close with the Panthers, I still think you see a large workload for Smith.
I'm with you. He has 44% of the team's air yards. Like, he's just racking them up, man. 23% target share. If there's one guy on this team that could get double-digit targets, it's Devontae Smith. And the separation that he creates is it's like he's in another zip code from some of these defenders. It's crazy. So I'm 100% with you on Devontae Smith. I have no problem going to like a Hurts Devontae Smith pairing, skinny stack here. I'll also just throw this in there for large field tournaments. Zach Ertz is second on the team in targets over the last 2 weeks. He has 15 targets over the last 2 weeks, multiple red zone targets. And while he's not playing as many snaps as Goddard, they're essentially running the same amount of routes. So Goddard is cheap, or I'm sorry, Ertz is inexpensive. This game could see a decent amount of scoring. I think it should. And Ertz is going to be one of the cheapest actual offensive players that's going to stay on the field that you can get for the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't want to touch the run game here, though, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see Kenny Gainwell. I mean, this just speaks to the value of a target versus the value of a carry. When you have a running back who's getting the 2-minute drill work, the goal line work, and the receiving down work, and then just a bruiser who's getting the first and second down work, you want the former. You want Kenny Gainwell in this offense, even if he's getting less opportunity overall. But yeah, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't seem like a very easy play unless it's a large field tournament. But then you look at the expected ownership for the primary options on the Eagles side. Devonta Smith at 2.3% projected ownership. Jalen Hurts at 3.5% projected ownership. That means that skinny stack is going to have 0.1% projected ownership together. That's a large field tournament play, and you're not even going off the beaten path. So while I agree with you that the running backs seem pretty meh, and the tight ends are fine to go in MME, it just doesn't look like this team is getting enough attention offensively.
You know what's crazy? Did you see how many rushing yards the Panthers allowed last week?
No. Was it a lot?
245.
Well. My gosh.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, and this is a team that ranks top 3 in the NFL in yards per carry on offense.
Yeah. Dude, 245 rushing yards. This is crazy. What's up?
They're first in yards per carry right now.
Yeah, of course, Jalen Hurts helps the situation out. But I've said this a lot. People always ignore the efficiency and focus too much on the volume, which of course we want to do in many cases. But having a rushing quarterback that adds that additional element will open things up for running backs on the ground. There's no doubt about it. It's just crazy. 245 yards. The 3 prior games, they allowed 42 rushing yards, 48 rushing yards, and 45 rushing yards. But they faced Houston, New Orleans, who just was flat, and the New York Jets. When you're facing decent enough offenses, I'm just not convinced, especially with J.C. Horn out, that this Carolina defense on either phases of the defense is going to be in a shutdown form. I'm not buying that yet. The matchups they've had were super easy. And then we saw what Dallas did to them, absolutely carved them up. So I'm not afraid to get to Philly. And as you pointed out, at low ownership on most of these guys makes it that much more appealing. How are you approaching Carolina this week?
Well, I think Christian McCaffrey might play. So that changes things a whole lot because
I hope he's a game time decision and doesn't get ruled in until like right around 11:30. And then they say he's going to be limited like they did in week 9 against the Chiefs last year. And then he ripped off monster performance. I'll go to so much McCaffrey if that's the case, because his ownership will be lower than it should be.
That's right. You said it all. I will not be anywhere else. I will be above the field everywhere on Christian McCaffrey should that happen. Just from an opportunity standpoint, from a volume standpoint, from a receiving game standpoint, from a floor and ceiling standpoint, there's no running back like him in the NFL, even when he's remotely healthy. As you alluded to, last year we had an extremely similar situation where, people remember it because he got hurt at the end of that game, which essentially ended his season. Yep. But the people who played him in DFS were so correct to get him whenever the salary is lower than it should be and the ownership is lower than it should be. Just go on Christian McCaffrey if he's in the lineup. If not, the situation changes, obviously. Chuba Hubbard would probably be... Is it Chuba or Chubba? Chuba, got it. Chuba Hubbard would be a fine play at 6K, but it's not something we need to prioritize. The Philly rush defense has been fine so far. They rank just slightly above average in schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed, but they've actually been, in terms of that metric, a rush funnel, which actually doesn't surprise me all that much. So... obviously, it's a big downgrade if we don't have McCaffrey in. But DJ Moore, I mean, what can you say about him, man? I'm just absolutely getting to that next level at a wide receiver 1, third amongst all wide receivers in expected fantasy points, and still just 4th in salary. So projection right in line with salary-based expectation, it's still go if you think this game's going to be a shootout, which I do.
I think it could absolutely shoot out. No question. And if it does, you and I are going to want some pieces of it. I hope the same thing happens with Christian McCaffrey as it did last year. Maybe it won't. I mean, it's likely that's not going to be the case, but listen to this. I just went back from last year looking at the Millie Maker, right? Mangione Motorsports won the Millie. with 238 total fantasy points. All right. Christian McCaffrey was in his lineup at $8,500. So very similar, Matt, 8,700. This guy's
87.
a 10K player, first of all. Guess what his ownership was?
Don't tell me it was under 10%.
6.3. 37 DraftKings. 6.3 because people were worried that there was going to be a timeshare. And you know what? Even if there was a timeshare and Christian McCaffrey wasn't in the Millie Maker winning lineup, and I saw that he was at 6.3%, and I had 20% of him, I'd say, you know what? I'm okay with that. I'd probably do that again.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's just, it's a poker analogy. There are so many outs with Christian McCaffrey. It's a shootout, they pass to him more. If it's a blowout, they run with him more. He just stays on the field, and he's just incredibly effective on a per touch basis. Don't overthink it.
We losing it, Jordan? Is the audio still working? Okay. Okay. Good. All right, but audio's still working. That's all I need to know. Okay. We'll get it figured out as long as we got the audio, and just confirm in chat, guys. If you can still hear what we're saying, that's really all I care about at this point. And maybe it's not the most appropriate time to ask if we could get over 100 likes, but that would be cool. We're at 88. I think we can get there. If you haven't done so yet and you're watching, hit that thumbs up. Much appreciated. All right. Anything else from this one, Matt? I think we pretty much covered it.
Yeah. I mean, Robbie Anderson's really been annoying me in the fact that he just completely fell off the map from an opportunity standpoint. If you told me that Anderson would be outside the top 40 in expected fantasy points when Christian McCaffrey already got injured earlier in the season, I don't think I would have believed you. And then to say that Terrace Marshall hasn't blown up in the absence of those two players, also pretty tilting. It just speaks to how effective DJ Moore looking like that star 4th round season long pick that we're going to be picking in the 1st round year after year after year.
JL says, not hearing anything about strategy. Pretty sure that entire Christian McCaffrey thing we just talked about was all strategy based, but I don't know, Matt. Maybe I'm dumb. All right. Houston, all right. New Orleans and Washington. Washington's defense is not good, bro. Hey, maybe we're to believe that they're not as bad as they've been, and I think that's reasonable to some extent. But last week, Cordero Patterson trashed them, absolutely trashed them. And they have been creating insane game conditions for Stacks. Believe it or not, it has been the case. Now, I'm not sitting there saying go and load up on Stacks, but I mean, Taylor Heineke and Terry McLaurin, who we loved last week, fantastic. On the other side, Cordero Patterson, huge game. I mean, Kyle Pitts still can't figure it out, even though he had 9 targets or whatever it was. But I don't think you can just write this game off because it's Washington and New Orleans team that has been really one of the most enigmatic teams in the league. It's so difficult to predict what you're going to get out of New Orleans. And the fact that Taysom Hill is getting goal line attempts is just maddening. But last thing I'll say on this, man, I want to turn it over to you for both sides. Alvin Kamara, I've said it before, I'll say it again, had 1 game of 20 plus carries in his career in 60 games before this. Remember last week we said now he has 2 out of 3 games this season. Now it's 3 out of 4. And he went from having career high 24 carries to a career high 26 carries. It's so hard to make much of this though, because if you're not getting the goal line work all the time and he wasn't targeted a single time last game. What a tough spot to be in for Alvin Kamara if we're trying to decide what to do on him.
Yeah. Sorry, you got a dog barking, but we have a situation here where we're learning about the value of a target versus a rushing attempt. So in this case, we don't have any sort of clear opportunity that is valuable. We call them quality opportunities for Alvin Kamara in this offense. And so while I do think that there is a high chance that this game shoots out, I also think that Alvin Kamara just isn't as clear of a play in fantasy than he has been in previous years. I mean, there's just less situations, less game environments where we know he is going to be utilized correctly. I mean, I'm nervous about the fact that if they just simply move away from him more often in this offense. Now, I think the targets are going to come back, and our projections compared to salary-based expectations are pretty good, but I don't know. I guess this Washington defense sets up pretty strong for him. It's just the New Orleans offense not showing up some weeks, doing weird things at the goal line, and sometimes Jameis Winston just not showing up to play. It just makes Alvin Kamara less of a necessity for me.
I'm just not comfortable getting to him right now. Not at least not at a large capacity. You know, I don't have a lot of faith in him. Now, Matt, here's the biggest thing though. If his ownership continues to trend down throughout the week, and you're getting like 6%, 5% Alvin Kamara come Sunday, I think you could convince me that just based on how damn good this guy is and how many touches he's getting, that eventually that huge game is coming. It is coming. Like, we can both agree that the huge game from Kamara will happen. He still touched the ball 26 times, but when you're talking about, right, you're talking about like these opportunities that you wanted, the goal line aren't there. The guy getting him out in space as a receiver wasn't there. But how long can he lay dormant? How long can Alvin Kamara hibernate, especially with all of this volume? So I will be keeping a keen eye on ownership, and I think that's a fair way to go about this one.
I do actually want to say one thing about that, though. So I know I always refer to expected fantasy points all the time on this show, and I'm using PFF's expected fantasy points model. It's a little more robust, if you will, statistically, but another website, RotoViz, has an expected fantasy points model, also very strong, and it goes back further, allowing you to do longevity studies on running backs specifically. And I will say that it is very, very rare for players to hit that 50-game threshold, that 60-game threshold, and still have a very high fantasy points over expectation. In fact, if you have 2 or more fantasy points over expectation at that point in your career, about 50 games, you are considered the elite of the elite. Kamara is rounding the corner to 70 games, where we only have a handful, 4 running backs that have averaged 2.0 fantasy points over expected per game. The efficiency days could theoretically be less frequent than we've seen.
Okay. All right. I mean, I can't argue with that take. Definitely can't. And they have been less frequent, but I think they're still going to happen is all I'm saying. And in tournaments at low ownership. Yeah. But Matt, I'm with you in that. I think it's going to happen. If we keep trending in this direction, there's no way we're going to come to week 8 or 9 and Kamara is going to be in the same pricing tier as Henry, McCaffrey, and Dalvin Cook.
Well, let me put it this way. Just keeping that same stat forward, there have only 2 players who have averaged more than 2.5 fantasy points over expected and played 80 or more games. One is Jamal Charles, the actual GOAT, and the other is Derrick Henry.
Man after my own heart. Jamal Charles is the greatest ever, man. And my favorite running back to ever play the game. Such a shame his career went out the way it did.
If he hadn't torn his ACL in 2015, I think he's still running.
And both times he did it were non-contact.
I know.
Sucks. The guy averaged 5-6 yards per carry like it was nothing every single year. Go back and watch. Like, if you're younger and maybe you just got into fantasy football recently, please go back and watch Jamal Charles highlights from any game you want. I mean, the Denver game was maybe the great, or the Oakland game.
The Oakland game is the best one.
Dude, the Oakland game was phenomenal. But he won me so many fantasy leagues back between, like, what was it, 2009 and 2013. He was unstoppable, truly unstoppable.
I mean, that was really the year 2013 where, you know, it got me into fantasy football, and having Jamal Charles on a bunch of teams was a big component of that.
Yep. And I think it was 2009 that Larry Johnson was a starter, called his coach. Who was the coach back then for the Chiefs? What the hell was his name? Todd Haley?
It might have been, yeah.
Right? Called him the F word.
And
I'm not talking about fun. And then I think they cut him or they benched him, and Jamal Charles took over for the second half of the season. I think he had 1,000 rushing yards in just the second half of the season. That's how good he was, man. talk about that guy all day, but I'm with you. I don't want anything to do with the Saints passing game, but this would be the spot to exploit Washington. I just don't have faith anywhere here. If you do, Matt, we'll make it quick because I don't want to go for another 8 hours, but if you do, go ahead.
No. I mean, Juwan Johnson's being used a lot in the red zone, but not anywhere else. So he's outside the top 20 in expected fantasy points. I guess we do have to say that it looks like with Tony Jones hitting IR, Ty Montgomery would be in line for a huge workload if Alvin Kamara were to go down. We never would want that to happen. But other than that, maybe I'm looking at a big play from Kenny Stills at 3K. But, I guess Marcus Callaway is still just 4,700, but none of this is really appealing. I'm probably going to go stay away or super low salary.
Okay. So the other side of this one is not exactly pretty, given that New Orleans has been a pretty decent defense. I saw a really good breakdown though on Twitter talking about how Danny Dimes actually made an amazing play looking off the defender, forcing him to bite, forcing the outside corner to bite, and then Barkley was gone. But it actually turned out that Barkley saw the defender step up. Did you hear about this? No. Yeah. So on a throw to Evan Ingram in the flat, or I guess it was like a stick route, maybe 7 yards deep, saw the defender come in and bite and came up to Daniel Jones and goes, listen, he's biting on that. So Daniel Jones looked off whoever was defending Barkley. And then he got that additional step on him down the sidelines to tie it up to go to overtime. And it was just like, first of all, Barkley's football IQ to see something like that, lining up outside is incredible. But also that New Orleans has some vulnerabilities on defense. I still just don't think this is as bad a secondary as we saw, and their run defense is spectacular as we saw in week 4 against the Giants.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And that's such a cool story to figure out the defense on the fly like that, especially from the running back position. So cool. But yeah, the Saints defense isn't a defense that I'm really adjusting my expectations for opposing offenses here. So on the Washington side of the ball, I mean, it was good to see Taylor Heineke continue to push the tempo, to continue to pass, and to continue to be able to put up a lot of points against an Atlanta defense that we're certainly not scared of. I am kind of concerned here that it's kind of a letdown game, but I'm looking at a player who's 11th on the slate at his position in expected fantasy points and then 13th in salary, and then I'm seeing a projected ownership of under 3%. So while the shootout potential of this game, or shootout probability, however you want to look at it, is kind of middling for this slate, I do think that if you do see a route for this to shoot out, then Heineke looks like a really interesting play. And then you could pair him with Terry McLaurin, who I agree his salary is just too high, but it's also pushing his ownership pretty far down the list here of wide receivers. I still think you could go back with Antonio Gibson. I hate the fact that he's in a time here that J.D. McKissic gets a ton of targets, but he's still 16th among all running backs in expected fantasy points. And then you're talking about a player who has been efficient his entire young career, plus 1.2 fantasy points over expected per game. This is pretty middle tier. Unless I'm playing larger field tournaments, I'm probably not prioritizing the Washington offense, but I see a way that it can succeed.
All right, Matt, let's talk New England and Houston. Patriots, big time road favorites against a Houston team that, I mean, they can't run the foot, or they can't move the football. It's really bad at this point. They're Davis Mills orchestrating this offense. It's just going to end. It's going to crash and burn every single week. The one thing I was talking about when I mentioned context earlier in the show was when referencing Damian Harris. And I think when you look at our tool, the game script adjusted run percentage, and you see that New England is dead last in that, you have to consider the fact that they decided they weren't even going to try to run against New Orleans or against Tampa Bay, the two teams that are allowing 2.7 and 3.1 rushing yards per attempt, respectively. You can't do it. We saw in week 1, Dallas decided we're not even going to try it. Okay. We're going to just throw the football, and we had a chance to win. New England was in the game, had a chance to win. You know what you have to do to beat those teams. But if you were to run it back to week 1, where they faced the Miami Dolphins and lost by a point, but close competitive game, neutral game script, 23 carries. In that win against New York, 16 carries. So while I know he's not involved heavily as a pass catcher, he was on the field for almost 65% of snaps, even though he only had 4 rushing attempts, which led the backfield. I think that Belichick is the type of coach who understands where their bread is buttered from game to game and will get back to at least a balanced approach and have Damian Harris far more involved than he was last game against a Houston team where they're almost 10-point favorites on the road. That's really the only interest I have, along with Jacoby Myers, who hasn't scored since 2018, and that was in college. But I do think those two guys make for interesting plays, given overall Jacoby Myers' huge volume of targets, and eventually he's going to break one. And I think Damian Harris gets back to a big workload. That's all I have from this game.
Yeah, I'm shocked with the amount of the low ownership, the low expected ownership of Damian Harris.
Me too.
In a pretty simple game script scenario where we look at a super high implied total for his team, a super low implied total for the opponent. We think that they're going to score, they're going to get up fast, and they're going to run the ball to end the game. I don't know how you don't see Damian Harris as a better play than the field does. And of course, the Awesemo projections say the same thing here. He's inside the top 15 running backs in projections while being outside the top 20 in salary. Sign me up for that. Absolutely. Even Mac Jones, I was surprised to see his salaries at QB 20. I mean, I'm not excited. They don't score a lot of touchdowns, but in large field tournaments, I could definitely go there. But yeah, as you said, it's Damian Harris. We saw J.J. Taylor get under 5 opportunities and fumble. Good night. Bill Belichick sits you for the rest of time on that one. And then Brandon Bolden is kind of taking this James White-esque role. Right now, ranks tied for top 36 in expected fantasy points, but that's what you're going to expect from that type of role. 6.8 DraftKings points is not something to get really excited about unless this team starts to score touchdowns. So the only other player, as you mentioned, Jacoby Myers, is, eventually going to score here. He's 13th in expected fantasy points. That's pretty solid for a Patriots player in general. But as you would expect, minus 2.5 fantasy points under expectation. Really, this whole offense is performing under expected. Nelson Aguilar out there running wind sprints. And I guess you can throw some dart throws at the tight ends, but neither of them are appealing. They take away from each other.
Yeah, for sure. Jacoby Myers has the 7th most targets in the league. So it's going to open up for him eventually. And it's not like Mac Jones isn't targeting him deep downfield. I think he has 7 20 plus targets or 20 plus yards targets on the year. So it will come. It will come, and hopefully I'll be there for it. Matt, I'm not on Houston, and I think there's some other games that are far more appealing, unless there's something for Houston for you. But I just don't see how they move the football, and I don't want to get cute with this. I think there's plenty of other spots that we can get creative.
I will never say it's a bad idea to play Brandon Cooks.
That's
right
fair.
now. Yeah, you can play him anytime you want. When he fits in the lineup, 6,100, that's great. His 9.8% projected ownership right now is still outside the top 10 wide receivers. Just surefire volume on an abysmal team.
What are you doing with Denver and Pittsburgh?
Yeah. Hey,
hold on.
You must have heard my dog over there.
Set it up.
But yeah,
hold on. My dog started going crazy. Sorry. Pittsburgh's actually laying a point at home. So it seems that there isn't a ton of faith in Denver. That's all I wanted to get out there.
Yeah, they have their QB room in flux, although we currently have Teddy Bridgewater in our projections. Does it really change that much if we put Drew Lock into our projections? Do the skill position projections that trickle down from that really alter all that much? I certainly don't think so. This is just a middling efficiency offense that I'm only interested in the big play ability of Cortland Sutton and Noah Fant. I really hope it happens for Javonte Williams, and I'm fine with you going there in tournaments saying like this is the breakout week, but it's really hard to time those things, especially with a team that's committed to using Melvin Gordon at least just enough so that we can't really use either running back. So it comes back to Sutton, who has a projection inside the top 20 with a salary outside the top 25 wide receivers, and Fant, who has a pretty high salary for a tight end at 4,900, but I still think he could easily have a 15-point game here. The Pittsburgh defense is better in reputation right now than they are in their metrics. I mean, they're still pretty good in terms of their ability, but in terms of expected points added for the offense, that's one of the defensive metrics I look at. They're just 16th. That's just league average. And schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, they're just above average, like 2 or 3 fantasy points less than the average team. I'm not scared of them as a defense as I was previously, so I'm just going to play those good players. Not to say Denver's good, but Sutton and Fant look pretty solid to me.
I just want to say this much. Courtland Sutton, if Drew Lock starts and is getting like 5% ownership, Sutton, to me, is wildly attractive for tournaments. Now, you talked about Steelers and reputation. Sure, PFF has them 31st. We talked about this in pass coverage this year. They have not been good. I mean, they have really, really struggled to defend the pass. And Courtland Sutton is the type of guy that if you can get him downfield and just give him some toss-up balls, some 50-50 balls, he's going to come down with a decent amount of them. Teddy Bridgewater is actually throwing deep balls at a pretty high clip this year, especially for Bridgewater. But Drew Lock, man, this guy loves to air it out. He came in and almost a quarter of his throws were 20-plus yards downfield. Think about that. That's crazy. A 24% deep ball percentage. If that's the case, give me some Courtland Sutton and let me just see if he can come down with a couple deep balls.
I had a thought that Drew Lock might end up becoming the next generation's Ryan Fitzpatrick, where he's like just good enough to be like the 35th quarterback in the league for like a decade. So like maybe get that beard going and see where that takes you for Drew Lock, because I do think that he's better than most, if not all, of the backup quarterbacks in the league right now. He's certainly going to be more aggressive than most backup quarterbacks in the league. So I like that call a lot. And Courtland Sutton, what a freak of nature athletically.
Yeah, for me, it's not even that Drew Lock has to be good. It's just the opportunity will be there for Courtland Sutton to get some big chances. It might just all implode, but we know that there's a lot of opportunity when Drew Lock is just chucking, and they're going to struggle to run too. I mean, Pittsburgh's run defense has actually been passable. So, do you like anything from Pittsburgh?
Man, Big Ben's hurt. He's got multiple injuries now. What does he have? A hip? He has a shoulder or a muscle injury. He's going to play through it. They don't have anything else behind him that would make me remotely excited. We're not pumped for Dwayne Haskins for another Mason Rudolph experiment. So we got to take what we can get with him. But I don't know. I don't know about this offense. One thing I'm worried about is if Najee Harris loses any kind of volume, he's not going to be nearly as good as a fantasy play, because he's really just getting there on targets alone, second in amongst all running backs in expected fantasy points per game. But like the rest of this offense right now, he's performing way below expected, as minus 4.5 fantasy points under expected. That's partially on Harris not being efficient himself, but that's partially on the offense just not getting anything going. And man, I have no faith in Ben Roethlisberger getting the ball to anyone but Deontay Johnson, clearly his favorite target in this offense. Johnson has 19.9 expected fantasy points per game right now. That's tied for second among all wide receivers. So when you're talking about the wide receiver 11 in salary, that's good enough to go there. But the Denver defense is pretty darn strong in schedule adjusted fantasy points. They've actually been the third toughest defense for opposing offenses. So, man, the mighty have fallen in terms of the Pittsburgh offense. I'm not excited, especially if Claypool does not play again.
If you look at the games, right, since the start of last season, that Deontay Johnson wasn't affected by injury, right? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 of them. And I'm not, they're really, yeah, I mean, the one game he got benched, but 15 games, he's been targeted double-digit times in 12 of them. He's going to get peppered with targets. Volume is king. It's not a good matchup, but he's just going to get targets, and I'm never going to argue with anybody for trying to go there. All right.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's move on then. Let's go to the Giants and Dallas. I believe this begins our 4 p.m. slate, right? You got a 52-point total, highest on the slate. And now Danny Jones actually looks okay. Dallas looks very good. If we get a shootout here, I wouldn't be stunned. But my first question is, how legitimate do you think this Dallas defense is right now?
No, they're not that legit. They are way better than they were. And they're moving towards average. And maybe they have a possibility of being an above average defense by the end of the season. But are they a defense that we're changing our expectations for opposing offenses yet? I really don't see that quite yet. I mean, we saw the Carolina Panthers be able to march the ball downfield consistently, no problem against this team. I think we're going to see plenty of shootouts, especially when you consider the quality of their offense being the main factor in a game scenario where that Dallas offense is really tough to stop from anyone forcing opposing offenses to pass. So I'm fine going back to Danny Dimes here. I think, 400-yard game we're not going to get every week, but with the rushing floor and ceiling, he's 10th among all quarterbacks in expected fantasy points, 12th in salary. The projections look really good. Yeah, if you're going to say there's a lot of points here and I could get a salary reduction from Prescott and still play a bunch of players here, good to go with Danny Dimes.
I like it too. How confident are you that these receivers are back in action?
I don't know. Hey, it was really good to see Kadarius Toney be competent as a player. I believe he is now second in the NFL in forced missed tackles by a wide receiver behind Rondale Moore, and he's only played essentially one game where he had any type of real volume. So to see him be that elusive right off the bat, certainly it speaks to his ability maybe as a return man if he gets healthier and he just gets more involved. But hey, that was really good to see. Kenny Golladay, we also saw a spark of life there. And, Saquon Barkley, we talked about him earlier. If he can be his old efficient self, not to say that's not partially on the offense to get him going, but if he does have a productive day again, it makes this whole offense easier. I'm fine going to the wide receivers in this case, especially if I'm playing in a larger field tournament and I want to pivot away from the more popular Cowboys options.
Daryl Bevel just said that there will be a bigger role for Shenault this week. Take that for what it's worth, because Dan Campbell said there'd be a bigger role for Swift, and that happened. But I still like him. Just wanted to get that out there, Matt, while the news trickled across. But yeah, dude, John Ross had that long touchdown. You had Kadarius Toney. There are some options here for sure. But if Shepard plays, $5,300 is just way too cheap for a guy that was leading the team in targets by a mile through the first couple of games. Do me this favor. If everyone's active, rank your top 3 offensive skill players for the Giants this week.
Okay. Barkley, for sure. Then, this is tough. Everyone's active. Shepard, Golladay.
Okay. I like it. Now, on the other side, I love how everyone just ruled out Ezekiel Elliott as dead, right? They were the anti-Zeke people were just loving week 1 where he was ineffective and they didn't run the ball. And then week 2 where Pollard had that huge game, but Elliott was still fine. Now you're looking, you're saying, okay, maybe he's not done quite yet. Now, granted, are we getting the Ezekiel Elliott of old where there was no one else in the backfield? No, I understand that. And quite frankly, you should be less concerned about Elliott and more concerned with this passing game, because Dak Prescott has not needed to lean on CeeDee Lamb or Amari Cooper. And then when he does lean on the pass, he can go to Dalton Schultz and he can go to plenty of other options. Matt, he has attempted, this is crazy. Week 1, 58 passing attempts. And everyone's like, okay, this is that Dallas offense we knew. Weeks 2, 3, and 4, 27, 26, and 22 passing attempts for Dak Prescott. They're running the shit out of the football. They're winning games running the shit out of the football with Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. And if this type of formula works, they're going to keep doing it. Now, could this turn into a shootout? I suppose it could, but I just want to throw it out there. The passing volume has undoubtedly been lower for the Dallas Cowboys than it has been in past. And I think week 1 was kind of an anomaly. You look at our game script adjusted rush percentage. They are bottom 10, 46% rushing percentage. And that doesn't even includes the Tampa game. So it's a weird spot right now for Dallas, Matt.
Yeah, I would say that. And, I would also say, I'm so sorry the offense has been efficient. They're running the ball because it's working. It worked extremely effectively last week. And when we just narrow it down to Ezekiel Elliott, who, people have been all over the place with their opinions of Elliott to start the season. The man is 6th in the NFL in carries, 4th in rush yards, 3rd in total touchdowns, on the 5th most red zone touches. The reason the passing game isn't utilized is because from a game-to-game standpoint, Dallas can beat you with their rushing attack. And if they see that as the best way to exploit you, they'll just keep going there over and over and over again, and they'll dump it off to Tony Pollard. Yeah, it sucks to see Ezekiel Elliott 41st amongst all running backs in targets. Clearly, that workload is being taken away by the tight ends, by Tony Pollard. But still, this offense ranks 4th in the NFL in expected points added per play. That's fantastic. So keep doing whatever it is you're doing. And it's even better for a long-term standpoint to see that when it makes no sense to run the ball like it did in week 1, they just completely abandon it. That means that there's some intelligent game planning and play calling going on in Dallas, which is not something we could have said at the beginning of Dak Prescott's and Ezekiel Elliott's time in Dallas. So yes, it's been annoying to see CeeDee Lamb have 2 down games here, but his projections are way higher than his wide receiver 15 salary. And you could definitely go to Amari Cooper as well. His salary is just below CeeDee Lamb at 6,100 versus 6,200, but so is his projection. I mean, you could definitely do worse than stacking these players. It's going to be a ton of salary here, but I love all of these options against a Giants defense who ranks pretty bad in schedule adjusted fantasy points, bottom 6 in the NFL against opposing offense. That's more advantageous for opposing offenses.
So you're cool with the ownership right now and guys like CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper coming in the top 5, top 10?
Yeah, I totally get it. I totally get it. I see the shootout potential here. Now, especially we're almost there, but there is a player who kind of unlocks the slate in terms of salary that lets you get there with premium options all over the place. So in that case, yeah, you can get both of them. Great.
All right. Matt, we got how many games to go here? 3 games to go? We got 3 to go. And one of them I don't imagine we'll spend a whole lot of time on. But let's go to San Francisco and Arizona. The 49ers 5-point dogs on the road, 50.5-point total. Arizona, the only team right now that is still undefeated after coming in and beating up on the Rams. I mean, that was not suspected at all. But San Francisco Shanahan has not ruled out Jimmy Garoppolo yet. It sure appears, though, that Trey Lance will be the starter this week. So maybe I'm wrong. It feels like we're trending in that direction, though. What are we doing with Trey Lance? George Kittle, who was targeted 11 times last game, despite once again underwhelming. I mean, he's got to have a game at some point. And then Deebo Samuel, who is proving week in and week out that he is as legit as they come.
Yeah, and I think this is the most important aspect of the entire slate. If Jimmy Garoppolo sits, which I really believe he's going to, I think personally, and this is my narrative, I don't know anything more than anybody else, but I think Kyle Shanahan is just playing games with us. I think Jimmy Garoppolo is really hurt. I think he said it from his own mouth that he was hoping to miss a couple weeks. And then Kyle Shanahan kind of dove back in there in the coach speaky way that he does and said, no, wait a minute. We're not going to rule him out until we absolutely have to. I think this is a gamesmanship thing more than Jimmy Garoppolo's availability. Again, that's my take on the situation. If Trey Lance plays, play him everywhere. Play him everywhere is my suggestion. At 5,700, you are going to want this type of fantasy upside from a rushing quarterback who played 51% of snaps last week and scored 20 fantasy points anyway. He's in an incredible offense, and we have seen this where great offenses and great offensive coordinators get enmeshed with rookie quarterbacks or brand new quarterbacks, and it takes literally a year of film for defenses to figure it out. We saw it with Lamar Jackson in 2019. The other example I always think of is when Colin Kaepernick joined the San Francisco 49ers and they switched from Alex Smith. Yeah, Patrick Mahomes switching from Alex Smith to Mahomes as well. It took literally an entire season of film for defenses to finally figure it out a little bit.
Even when Michael Vick got out of prison and took over for Kevin Cobb, why is that shocking, Jordan? He was in prison and he got out. They couldn't stop him the entire year. And then the following year, he was a shell of what he was the previous season. I know they had already seen Michael Vick, but you're absolutely right. Even in a strange case like that, they didn't know what to do with him either.
That's what I think is possible here with Kyle Shanahan, widely considered one of the best play callers and game planners in the NFL, with this brand new wrinkle all the time. And then we very well could see, I'm not saying it's a guaranteed. I am not saying it's guaranteed. We could see a very similar situation where it's much easier from a PR standpoint to transition to Trey Lance as a full-time starter. I'm not saying that I know anything more than anyone else, but I'm saying that this is the route we have seen before, and the rushing ceiling for Trey Lance is undeniable. It's only comparable to Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts. And one thing I noticed, I know this is a DFS show, but in the season-long trade value charts, Trey Lance right now is currently amongst the likes of Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Matthew Stafford in terms of top-tier quarterbacks rest of season. So just talking about the upside in this one-game sample with a high total against the Cardinals offense, who you know is going to bring it, he's my favorite player on the slate. What can I say?
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. What about the skill players?
Yeah, so with rookie quarterbacks, sometimes we do see a dip in opportunity for the top tier players, or at least some variability, right? Whenever you're switching from one quarterback to another, we can have a situation where they're just dumping it down more often or tucking it and running more often, which is certainly something that we could see. But I still think, going against the talent of Deebo Samuel and George Kittle is a mistake. And we've already seen situations where, Deebo Samuel was wide open on that play. And how much of that is defenses respecting whatever direction they thought the play was going in and the rushing ability of Lance? Why can't we see other receivers get wide open once again? I think that breakout game for George Kittle is coming, so I'm fine going there even at 5,600, even if we do see Lance. After that, though, Sherfield, Sanu, no, we're not going there at all.
I got to keep going back to Kittle as well. And Avi, thank you for the super chat. He says, can you talk about the strength of the Cardinals defense? It seems like they have the type of team that can keep this team from making it up the field. It's fair to say, and thanks, Avi, that the Arizona Cardinals have piecemealed together a secondary that is far better than we initially suspected. And they do a pretty good job of getting to the quarterback as well. But like you said, when you have a quarterback in Trey Lance, it is very hard to figure out, especially in what would be his first start. It's not something I'm terribly concerned about. And yeah, someone else said, well, a lot of that production came on a 76-yard touchdown to Deebo. Yeah, but it still happened, didn't it? Big plays.
No, okay, let's talk about it. I kind of brought it up before, but I was in a big long rant. Yes, it did look like a broken play. No, we should not be taking broken plays out of our stat equations. But how much is that attributed to the defense respecting or thinking about something else that the 49ers were doing? Not saying that there are broken plays every game like that, but I think you can attribute some of it to the combination of Kyle Shanahan and Trey Lance doing things, giving wrinkles to defenses that they are not comfortable seeing yet.
It's fair. Arizona's a bit tougher to figure out. It feels like DeAndre Hopkins, in my opinion at least, is still a little bit overpriced. I don't know if the rib injury is still, kind of curtailing his production, but AJ Green, it might be him one week. It might be Kirk or Rondell Moore another week. There's just a lot of mouths to feed, including Chase Edmonds in the passing game as well. He didn't practice with a shoulder issue yesterday, so keep a close watch on him. And then James Conner's getting the goal line work. So all in all, really a messy situation in Arizona, despite how good their offense has been.
Hey, last week I was thinking about you with James Conner. That game script last week was exactly why you were talking up James Conner in the middle rounds of season long drafts in
Right.
best ball leagues. And yeah, in DFS, we're going to see him pop off like that sometimes with the high quality of this Arizona offense. They're going to be in the red zone sometimes. And it's nice to see them have an option. Remember that earlier in Kyler Murray's career, this was an area of major struggle for Kyler and this offense in the red zone. So now it looks like they're getting that sorted out. That's really excited for the overall upside here. Kyler's been amazing, man. It's just been a fun season so far to watch. As I've said on the show, I think that the 2019 Lamar Jackson type of season is in Kyler's range of outcomes. I don't think it stops here against the San Francisco defense, who ranks 23rd. That's bottom 10 in the NFL in points allowed per play. They are a little bit tougher against the opposing pass. They're 11th in yards per pass attempts allowed, but they're 24th in yards per carry allowed. So I see Kyler Murray keeping them honest with his legs and then trying to take a few deep shots over the top. Hey, the one thing I will say about this offense, though, is that DeAndre Hopkins simply isn't being utilized like a number one wide receiver. I'm not saying that a 16 target game is out of the question for him, but it simply doesn't look like that's the way they would like to use DeAndre Hopkins this year. I'm really shocked to say that he's wide receiver 30 in expected fantasy points per game. And the amount of targets he had last week was, I believe, the lowest he has seen in a game in over one season.
It's not good, especially because he had 4 targets in week 2, 6 in week 3, and 8 in week 1. He scored in week 1 and week 2. He had 3 touchdowns combined, which has kind of buoyed those fantasy totals. But you're not paying that price point for a guy that is going to average 6, 7 targets per game. You can't do it right now. You pay a couple dollars more to get to Devontae Adams, right? Or you pay the same price to get to Justin Jefferson or DJ Moore. To me, at this point, it's not even really a question. And that's the direction I'm going to take. Anything else from this one, Matt? We got 2 more to go.
Yeah, I'm happy to see AJ Green after I called him out as a solid play. He was pretty effective again in week 4. You could definitely go do worse than them. But as you said, this offense really is just spreading the ball around. So Kyler Murray and then everybody else.
All right. Well, what I know about this next game is that it's probably not going to be one, and I'm talking Cleveland and the LA Chargers. It's probably not going to be one that goes full out shootout. I mean, last week we thought, not all of us, but thought there could be some opportunity there with Cleveland and Minnesota. We definitely like Odell Beckham quite a bit. They decided to run it down Minnesota's throat. That game had a total of like 21. I think it was a 14-7 game, 21 total points. It was ugly on all fronts. Now Cleveland's getting 2 points on the road, 46.5 point total. I wouldn't be surprised if this game was actually relatively lower scoring, but we're going to talk about it anyway. And of course, maybe you have a different opinion, but I don't know how great I feel about Baker's arm right now. I don't see why, with their strong defense and pass rush and defensive line, that they wouldn't once again try as hard as they can to lean on the run with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Cleveland's defense after last week, I'm not going to lie, it has me a little bit worried to target the passing attack and the run game against the Chargers team that has already been coughing up a ton of yards, or at least a lot of efficiency to opposing rushing attacks.
Yeah, you said it there. I mean, so actually the news about Baker Mayfield's partially torn labrum came out maybe an hour before we started recording here, and I thought that it was in his throwing shoulder. So I'm not as concerned because it is in his left shoulder, his non-throwing shoulder. That does change things. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to say it doesn't affect him, but I'm going to go out on a limb and saying that your partially torn labrum on your non-throwing shoulder is quote unquote better than your throwing shoulder. Still, it does give me pause about this passing attack in general. And we were singing the praises of Odell Beckham on just a limited snap share, getting a huge amount of opportunity. And once again, he had a huge amount of opportunity. But if Baker Mayfield is unable to get him the ball, particularly deep downfield, then that's a problem, especially when you're talking about a Chargers defense that has been a very high quality, except for against opposing rushing games. They're actually ranked best in the league. That's toughest for opposing offenses in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. They're right there with the Bills, neck and neck for 1 and 2. And at least for the Browns, they're much easier to rush on than pass on. And that's really what the Browns want to do anyway. So I'm fine going to Nick Chubb, especially when you talk about his salary versus projection comparison, sort of not adding up. You know, this is a player that can score 2 touchdowns in a game. In a large field tournament, he's never really my favorite because he just doesn't catch passes. And what can we say? Like, Kareem Hunt is a real problem at the goal line. I believe he has 1 less goal line touch than Chubb. So his salary-based expectations are right in line with his projection. But now you're talking about 2 players in a run-heavy spot where it looks like they have a chance to be efficient. And we know how strong of players they are typically. With under 3% ownership, now you're talking about an okay tournament play. I'm fine going here. Just not something I absolutely need to prioritize because of the quality overall of the Chargers defense.
Nick Chubb does have 18 targets or 18 red zone carries to to Hunt's 9, but you're right, 4 to 3 inside the 5-yard line. Yeah. And 7 to 4 Kareem Hunt, or Nick Chubb inside the 10. But Nick Chubb hasn't really broken them off yet. I'd be shocked if we don't see in some of those games where he starts wearing down the defense. And I just think they're going to run a lot. I'm with you too at that price. I think Nick Chubb could be a sneaky play here. You wish he had some pass catching upside. You wish Kareem Hunt wasn't there. But if that was the case, Nick Chubb would be $9,000 every single week. All right, Matt, what about the Chargers against Cleveland?
Yeah, man, Justin Herbert. I'm thrilled to see his progression from year 1 to year 2. He's just been fantastic. 3rd in the league in expected fantasy points per game. And that just talks about the volume increase that you're seeing in this passing game that has allowed players like Mike Williams and Jared Cook to become extremely relevant on top of Keenan Allen. And I know people who have rostered Keenan Allen have been a little bit disappointed from week to week, but the targets are still there. The yardage is still there. The expected fantasy points, I guarantee you, are still there. 18.9 expected fantasy points for Keenan Allen. That's 4th best in the NFL. And we've seen that opportunity correction start to occur. Williams has been fantastic to begin the year. He's 3.4 fantasy points over expected, but his expected fantasy points continue to dip just a little bit back to a normal range, 11th among wide receivers in expected fantasy points. So I'm fine going either place. Austin Eckler's salary is a little bit disappointing, $7,600 on DraftKings. I would like to see it a little bit lower, but hey, huge game last week, super efficient, performing well above expectation. Actually, his 5.3 fantasy points over expected is tops among running backs right now on this slate. So, he's playing great. The whole offense is playing great. I could see a, large field tournament take on Jalen Guyton or something like that. But yeah, Cook, Allen, Williams, Eckler, I like them all.
I've seen a lot of you guys talk about or ask about any promos we have going on. If you use the promo code NFL Strategy Show, all one word, all caps, you get 25% off your first week, Awesemo plus Platinum. Every single thing on the site, whether it's the ownership tools, the player projections, the top stack tool, the boom bust tool, the lineup builder, and not just for football either. Baseball, basketball is quickly approaching. MMA, NASCAR, PGA, esports, all of that. If they have contests out there, we have premium content for it. All of the tools built by the #1 ranked DFS player in the world, Awesemo himself, Alex Baker himself, not just built, but used by him to win quite a bit of money. So you get 25% off your first month of Awesemo plus Platinum when using the promo code NFL Strategy Show, all one word, all caps. Now, if you want to do something different, you want to try the Express Pass out, it's like $3.95 a week. That includes all of our Showdown content as well, like all of the tools for Showdown, the top plays tool, which takes into account all of the probability. Very important tool. You'll love it. The ownership, the projections, all of our tiers content, the lineup builder. So there's that. And then if you wanted to just say, like, I want to make a true investment out of this. I want to go the distance. Let me go a full year. You could do that. One sport, all sport, doesn't matter, month, week, whatever. And the Fantasy Cruncher add-on, you can now do it for the week, the month, and the year. So, all in all, whether you're a serious player, whether you're a novice, whether you're a hobbyist, just looking to have some fun but win some money, Check us out, awesemo.com/join. And if you want to get 25% off that first week, NFL Strategy Show, all one word, all caps. Matt, let's wrap this one up with the Chicago Bears and the Las Vegas Raiders. I don't have a lot to say on the Bears right now, other than maybe Damian Williams ends up being decent in this game. I can't trust Allen Robinson right now. I can't trust Justin Fields. I know Darnell Mooney's coming off a strong showing, which is nice. He's questionable, but he's always questionable. Maybe that's somewhat viable, but I'm just not particularly interested in Chicago. Maybe you can sway me in the opposite direction if there's somebody you like here.
First of all, great to see Justin Fields really improve from week to week. Obviously, we expected that with the Detroit defense being highly susceptible to deep passing specifically. But hey, it was still great to see Fields and particularly Mooney really have a connection there in that second start for Fields. And also a sigh of relief all throughout Chicago that they've decided to stick with Fields for the foreseeable future. Obviously the right choice for now and for the franchise going forward. Sure, Damian Williams looks like a solid value play at running back 20 in salary. The projection is certainly way higher than that. In cash games, I think he's a pretty easy play this week, just based on volume alone. I think you'll see Khalil Herbert work in, but we're talking about a player who right now has just averaged 0.5 expected fantasy points per game. That probably rises to something like the 3 to 5 level is my expectation. Allen Robinson, man, one of the most disappointing starts to the season for any player. Just 3 targets last week, caught all 3, but this is just not a player I can really play right now, especially against a Raiders defense that has been better than expected. So the player you really got to focus on other than Williams is Darnell Mooney. I mean, the really solid 26th right now in expected fantasy points per game, and he's actually performing slightly below expectation on average despite a highly efficient week last week. Still not seeing ownership projection really move for him under 5%. And you're talking about a $4,700 player is not going to be all that popular. So I'm fine going there. Really, that's about it from the Chicago side, though.
We got 450 watching. You guys with us for the long haul. You got to love it. Maybe we get to 175 likes here. I think that's reasonable. If you haven't done so yet, hammer that thumbs up. Appreciate you in advance. And subscribe to the channel. If you're just coming in, you've wandered on by and come across the Awesemo channel and you like what you see, well, join the club here. Join the family. We'd love to have you. Hit that subscribe. And if you want to join the channel, get those emojis, custom emojis, and those sweet badges you see in chat, you could do that too. If you don't want to, don't worry about it. Doesn't bother me one way or another, but we'll shout you out if you do because, well, part of the Awesemo team now, baby. Anyway, Matt, close us out. Put a bow on this one. Las Vegas Raiders. Jordan looks like he's about to just die after this long
He's falling off the chair, just slinking back. Yeah, the Raiders got shown up against the Chargers, who just looked like a much stronger team. And I am here for this WWE style Joey Bosa talk where he called Carr, they got under his skin or all this stuff. That was really good. I love that back and forth after the game there. But hey, Carr's been playing really well, leads the league in passing yards right now, 7th in expected fantasy points, but he's just over in terms of fantasy points over expected, 0.5 points over expected. I wonder if we've already seen sort of the ceiling for Derek Carr. I don't know if it gets significantly better, although the Chicago Bears are slightly below average in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to opposing offenses and lead towards being a pass funnel defense, meaning it's easier to pass on them. So I guess I could go to Darren Waller once again, caught a touchdown last week. He is going to be tight end 1 in salary with no Travis Kelce, and it's not the level of safety that we're typically used to whenever Kelce is not on that slate. It's not paying up for tight end 1 blindly gives you safety. It's really different when we're talking about Waller. But still, the expected fantasy points, really solid. I think in tournaments, you could go with Henry Ruggs as well. Not a priority play, but that's the big play threat here. 1.4% projected ownership. So thinking about a player who only needs about 3 or 4 catches to really change his value, I like that there. And it looks like the running game is going to be consolidated with Peyton Barber out for a while. And, I guess Kenyon Drake is going to be utilized more than he was last week. What, do you only have 1 touch?
Yeah. And he was on the field for 20. He was on the field for 35% of snaps, just wasn't involved at all. And they were playing from behind.
Yeah, I will say that one thing pops in our projections this week. The Raiders defense against, I guess Justin Fields was better, but we're still talking about a rookie quarterback who is possibly going to be a little bit more mistake prone than your average quarterback here. Right now, the Raiders are defense 4 in our projections while being defense 11 in salary.
Matt, that'll do it. 12 up, 12 down. We will be back with you for this one next week, same time. Remember, strategy show every single day of the week, all culminating in a 4-hour live stream for Sunday leading up to lock. And I think, as a matter of fact, we're going to see if we can do a live before lock for that London game. Some huge prize pools out there. And Jordan, you're off on Sunday, so you don't have to worry about that. Shout out your boy Jordan Klein for producing. Are you going straight over to the betting show now? All right. Well, follow him over the Awesemo Odds channel. And I just threw out a video, must starts and sits of the week. If you're playing fantasy football, season-long dynasty, whatever it is, we got you covered at the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel. We've been making great progress there, and you guys have helped a lot. Tell your friends about it. Maybe they're not in the DFS, maybe they're in the season long, and they want to check it out. Hopefully you will too. Go subscribe over there. And of course, check out tonight's Live Before Lock and Deeper Dive for the showdown slate between the Rams and the Seahawks. Till next time, we'll catch you back here. Follow Matt at Draftaholic, me at Loughy_D. Peace.
See ya.
There it is. There it is.